Carolee Schneemann Body Politics explores the life and work of experimental artist Carolee Schneemann. This exhibition celebrates a radical artist who dealt with subjects from the objectification and oppression of women, to the taboos around women's bodies, to human suffering and the violence of war. Schneemann was an absolute trailblazer. She was ahead of her time in addressing sexual desire and sexual expression. Her work was really far-reaching, and she worked persistently for 6 decades, from the 1950s to the 2000s, using her own body, working across paint, found objects, experimenting with film and multimedia installations.
This is the first retrospective in the UK, but it's also the first major exhibition since Carolee's death. So it's the first time that the foundation has really had a role in helping steward Carolee's legacy as opposed to the artist herself. So it's very exciting for us. It gives us a chance to look at Carolee's work through a new lens, to bring new scholarship to it, to show things that haven't ever been seen before, and also to work really closely with the archives, the Getty and Stanford University archives.
As a performance artist, her work was very ephemeral. It often lasted an hour or an hour and a half. So she obsessively documented her work. She invited photographers and filmmakers to every one of her performances, and she was really creating her archive throughout her life. So we explore this in the exhibition through film, documentation, photography, through costumes, sketches, scores, notes for performances. We're really trying to bring her performances to life.
Nowadays, Schneemann is really considered very much a performance artist, a filmmaker, and these are vital parts of her practice. But she began in painting and always considered herself first and foremost a painter. What I think is really important to know about these works is that they were not juvenilia, they're not a transitory phase in her career, they're not an early stage that she quickly rushed through in order to get somewhere else. Painting was there from the beginning, and it was deeply embedded in all of her various endeavours from that point on. It really mattered to her as a practice. What makes it just such an exciting show to spend time with is the way in which it reveals the diversity of Schneemann's career, the really extraordinary range that she had as an artist.
We've been able to see for the first time the works together in a way that I think brings a kind of coherence to her work.
What she was really interested in was kind of blending and collaging a kind of multiplicity or a plurality of thought. If you look at her painting, it's kind of a little bit sculptural. If you look at her drawing, it's sort of like writing. There's a lot of in-betweenness in the work that's really important to think about. With Carolee Schneemann's work, it's not usually an either or. It tends to be a yes and then sometimes a why not.
Schneemann made work from and of the body. There's this wonderful letter where a friend wrote to her asking her why she showed her naked body in her work. And she replied with great exclamation and capital letters, "I do not show my naked body, I am being my body." And I think this is a great kind of feminist example of how she was reclaiming the history of women being objectified and cast as objects on display.
She's very much recognised today as a really early formative and powerful presence in the emergence of feminist art and art history in the early 1970s, the way in which she really just boldly explored questions of eros, sex, sexuality, using her own body and that of others in ways that were really kind of striking for the times. And I think we can now, from a present day perspective, look back and really see how extraordinary her practice was.
She was really kind of breaking down a lot of binaries. She had a different approach to language. She was trying to find kind of gender neutral language, which is obviously something we're thinking about a lot now, and how these things might connect not with a kind of masculine or male idea of history, but with something a bit more porous. Not necessarily female as a kind of an essentialist way, but outside of a kind of hegemonic masculinity, beyond like what we understood both in the 70s and how we kind of think about the hegemony of power now.
There are times when we take it for granted that everyone knows who Carolee Schneemann is because she's this fantastic figure. But even within that, who she is often relegated to a very narrow portion of her work. And so what I think is so exciting is that this gives us a chance to introduce Schneemann to an audience who may not be familiar with her work, but who also immediately gets to see the breadth and diversity of it.
There are these important threads, formal, political, theoretical, and I think what we get a sense of is an artist who is always thinking, you know, fiercely and seriously about the stakes of her practice. And that is something that I think really shines through in ways that will be exciting for people, whether they're meeting Schneemann for the first time or they're long-term admirers like myself.
Carolee Schneemann, Body Politics, invites you to discover the work of a radical, trailblazing artist who broke boundaries, challenged social taboos, and prompts us to ask questions about the kind of world that we want to live in.